Ayla. So my name is Edel Murphy. I'm the National Programme Manager of the PPI Ignite Network. I've been working obviously with Ayla and the other PhD scholars, as she has mentioned, and John, to organise the series. So I am delighted to be facilitating this first conversation as a case study on how to embed PPI in a PhD. We're going to have a conversation about Saoirse's PhD. So Saoirse, over to you to introduce yourself.
Yes, and thanks, Adele. Thanks, Ada. Like Ayla said, my name is Saoirse. I'm in my third year of PhD, and my PhD is focusing on looking at children who speak Polish and English, and developing some form of a language assessment that speech and language therapists can do with those children. So that's kind of the context of which we'll be trying to discuss how we've embedded PPI into that project.
Excellent. Thanks a million, Saoirse. And yeah, so what we're really going to focus on is the PPI aspect to it. So take us back to the start of your journey. I know it began when you were doing your undergraduate.
Yeah, so I did an undergraduate project between 2018 and 2019, and it was focused on kind of the same area, bilingual language assessment. And it was, a very short project, and you don't have any funding and you're limited with time and everything like that. But we got a lot of kind of informal feedback from the kids who were doing the tasks, and then the parents who were helping with the tasks. And the year after that, then I decided to do a master's and to kind of continue that research on at a master's level. Just kind of extended a little bit more. But again, anyone who's done a master's, you know what the time limits and stuff are like for projects. And I was working for a while, and I decided to apply for funding to do a PhD, which luckily I got. And with kind of the funding application, I kind of had to outline, I suppose, the project in whole to get the funding. And then some of my supervisors, so I have 3 supervisors, but 2 of them in particular, suggested incorporating some form of PPI into the project. And that came from the feedback that we'd gotten informally from the parents and from the children from the previous 2 projects, that we wanted to do something with it where we had the time, but to do it in a little bit more of a realistic, or kind of for want of a better word, a formal setting, as opposed to just getting the feedback while you're doing the research and then not doing anything with it. And we thought that kind of PPI would be the best approach for that.
Excellent. That's really interesting. I'm not sure any of the people on board will agree you've loads of time doing your PhD, but I know what you mean. It's a longer, extended period that you can get started. So I think that's really interesting that your 2 supervisors kind of were saying, look, it's not good enough to get the feedback and do nothing with it. And, you obviously felt that yourself as well. And when you started, I think it's of interest people here, had your supervisors prior experience of doing PPI, or were they coming to a new, or, where was your starting point on that aspect?
Yeah, so I'm actually lucky enough that one of my supervisors is Dr. Ruth McMenamin, who's heavily involved with PPI. And my primary supervisor, who they're both working in the speech language therapy department, had said, look, have a chat with Ruth, see what she says, because I myself don't have any experience with PPI. And I myself didn't have any experience with PPI and had never heard of it up until that point. So got in contact with Ruth, and Ruth is Ruth. She's so helpful that, we kind of put a plan together of how we could weave it into the project, and how it would best, I suppose, inform what we were doing and make it a little bit more realistic and a little bit more implementable, as opposed to, write your thesis and leave it on shelf.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. So Ruth McMenamin is the site lead of our PPI Ignite network at the University of Galway, or one of 2. And did you do the in Galway? I know, Saoirse, there's a module on PPI, like an accredited module. Did you take that module?
Yeah, I did. I took that module in first year, second semester of first year, which, again, Ruth had suggested, mainly because, again, I was starting from 0. And if there was a level lower than 0, that's probably where I was starting from in terms of PPI. Never heard of it, didn't know what it was. And I'd come from a background of research where it's very, you get your data, you analyze your data, you publish your data. And that was kind of it. And it was a whole new area, a whole new branch of kind of, I would say, kind of implementing research in a functional way. And so I did that module, and we kind of had to put together a plan within that module of how we were going to embed PPI within our projects, and then present it and get feedback from the module coordinators and module leads. So that was very worthwhile. And then as well as that, you're kind of given kind of resources and where to access resources. And, the PPI Ignite section of most of the websites for the universities have lots of information and stuff like that. So it was a nice foundation to start getting to know about PPI and how would be the best way to embed it into the project. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I know it's already in Galway, but there is a module, or there will be a module rolled out in some of the other universities over the next year or two, which I think is a good development for PhD students. Okay, so you had your plan, and then you had to get started. So maybe tell us a little bit about, how did you decide who you were going to include, and how did you go about finding people and all that early phase?
Yeah, I actually remember when I was doing the PPI module, we did a lot of, I went to a lot of these kind of talks with case studies in them, and everyone, when they were presenting their project, they'd done the project and they'd implemented the PPI. And I just felt so overwhelmed with how am I actually going to start and where do I actually start? And it took me a while to kind of take the traditional researcher hat off and put kind of a PPI hat on and say, they're not participants. You're inviting them to be on a panel and to advise on your research and consult on the research. So because I had done the two projects before, I had kind of links in the community with the Polish community. And so I got in contact with one of them and I explained the project, and she said she herself would be interested in doing it. And she would see if she could get some other people that she knew or within the community to join in the project as well. And the part of the PPI bit in my project is that we have a PPI group of 3 adults and 3 children. And the adults have their own children, so they bring their own children to the PPI meetings and groups and stuff like that. And so we kind of put that group together. The number that we chose 3 because we thought it would be kind of manageable, and we would have, say, if one dropped out, we'd have 2. But given that we had the 3 parents and the 3 children together, that's kind of how we started. I think it was the fact that I had experience working in the community, I had connections, and then kind of worked it that way.
Right. And when you say in the community, like, was this connected to was it around NUI Galway, University of Galway, or what community? Where, like, how did you actually find the people? Where were they?
So I'm based in Mayo. I'm based in Westport, and I was aware of they do Polish language classes in Westport, and I was aware of those, and I knew one of the teachers in there. So that's basically how I got
contacts. Okay, that's really interesting, because I think that's one of the things. One of the people involved in PPI often says, if you look around you in the shopping queue, you'll find your PPI contributors.
Yes, under your nose,
very under your eyes, very local. Okay, and interesting that you had your adults and your children in the same group. So that has obviously worked for you.
Yeah, it has worked. We were kind of just slightly concerned about safeguarding issues in terms of getting, say, 3 adults with 3 children that they didn't know. And so we kind of decided to stick with 3 adults with their own 3 children. And it works quite well in that, you have a dynamic of parents. If kids are messing, the parents will tell them to, stop. But they're not. They're a very good group, and they're very forthcoming with their ideas and any suggestions that they do have. We do separate sections within the group at times where we have the parents working on something, and then I would work with the kids on something, and then we kind of come together. So far it's been working quite well. But I think the key for a successful PPI group is not to just jump in straight away and you have your agenda and just get through it. That you do need to build up a relationship or connection with these individuals, because they're real people and they will want to participate. Not to just jump in. So
that's an interesting point from the PhD's point of view. Like, I wonder, over the first few meetings, did you wonder, were you making any progress? But then was it time well invested?
Yes, the first meeting we did nothing about the project, and that I just explained to them what the group was about, and we just spent the afternoon just chatting and getting to know each other. And within the group dynamic as well, there was two of them who were quite friendly, two of the adults that were quite friendly, and then the kids all knew each other, and then one of the other adults was aware of the other two people but weren't, within the same friend group as.
Right.
So the dynamic in
Hello?
that was good, but we kind of had to get everyone on the
Oh
on the
yes,
same
hi there.
Yeah. Yeah,
line.
exactly. Okay, so yeah, slow at the start then I think is an instrument.
Wasn't
And
that
I know,
so-
sorry, now we might just mute whoever is unmuted there,
Yeah.
John. And I think obviously there are other approaches in that having parents in separate from children is a way of doing it. But I think what you've done is a really practical approach, and I think that's one of the things about a PhD. You can't tick all the boxes and do
Yeah.
everything. And that's a really interesting solution. And then
Mhm.
in terms of the logistics of the meeting, and like it's interesting even that you haven't been able to bring one of your group here today. So in terms of the logistics of the meeting, what were the challenges and how did you agree on the logistics and so on?
So the first meeting, I did suggest that we meet in person, and just to kind of get some, and I don't like using the word ground rules, but just kind of some outlines and some bullet points that we all agreed on. And so we did that first meeting in person. And I just did it in a classroom of a local school. I knew the principal and I asked, and he said that's fine. And I know not everyone is that lucky and with that sort of stuff, but that was pretty much it. And yeah, the timing is, you have to understand that these people that are in your PPI group are real people. They have lives, they have jobs, they have school. You need to work around them, whatever best suits them. And we kind of outlined that in the original meeting, that not all the meetings would have to take place in person, that we could do some of them online. And they were very happy to facilitate that. And as well as that, you're kind of working within, when you have the kids involved, you're working within kind of school terms. They're on holidays. You don't want to be asking them to do stuff during holidays, and they're gone on holidays with parents and families then as well. So the logistics at the beginning can be quite daunting, because again, although I said you have loads of time to do your PhD, by the time you get it all set up and figured out, you have quite a limited time to implement it. So you do kind of have to factor that in as well, and that it's not all going to run on your clock, that you do have other people's clocks to
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we're 11 o'clock on a Friday morning, so presumably now the kids are in school and the parents are working. So
Exactly.
yeah. Okay. So give us a few examples of how the group contributed to your research and to the development and evolution of your research plans.
So the first thing was actually with the invitation letters that we used to kind of access the PPI group in the beginning, where I had developed them with Ruth and with Martha, who works with PPI in Galway as well. And we did it in a way that we thought was accessible to a PPI group. And so I thought that the first thing that I should actually probably do is ask them how they felt about those invitation sheets and letters and stuff like that. And then after that, we've worked on invitation sheets for actual data collection for the participants of the actual research. And we got actually quite interesting feedback from the parents, who said that a lot of the times when things are translated into Polish in Ireland within a healthcare setting, that it doesn't actually fully make sense when it has been translated. And so what we did was worked on the information sheets in English, got them professionally translated, and then gave them back to the PPI group. And then they said, well, say this bit doesn't make sense, that's too wordy, I don't understand that as a parent. You'd never get that in Poland from a speech and language therapy department or whatever. And then the kids themselves, when you go into, and I think this bit might be slightly specific to this project, but when you go into a project with your own kind of preconceived notions, and somebody says something to you, you're kind of a bit taken aback, but you understand, but it's something you'd never have thought of before. Whereas I would have thought, because the kids speak Polish and English, that the best thing to do would be to give them their information sheets in Polish. And when they sat down and looked at them, they said, well, why isn't the Polish and the English both on the same sheet? Because we're half Polish and we're half English. and that was their kind of their own identity and how they perceived themselves to be. Whereas in the previous research, I had given the information sheets and stuff like that to them in Polish only and not in English. So we've been working on that sort of stuff. And then with the tasks, they're all pre-recorded tasks, and they have been developed by researchers, but it's kind of getting a ground level insight into, are they actually suitable for children? So the stories that some of the kids said they liked the story. The tasks are embedded into kind of Teddy is going on an adventure, just for a little bit of background. And some of them found it nice, but some of them thought it was a little bit babyish, whereas we just assume that it's, all kids find the same thing interesting and engaging. So that's kind of the stage we're at now, in terms of their level of involvement. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So they helped refine your qualitative questions as well. I think that's really interesting. And have you they couldn't come to the meeting, but I think you've some feedback from them that you'd like to share with the people today.
Yeah, so I asked them if one of them would like to come to the meeting with one of their kids, and they said that they would love to, but they just didn't have the time with work and with school and stuff. So they kind of wrote a little bit of a reflection about their time with the project so far. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, before people start to read, and this is terrible now, we let them read first.
Yes, yeah.
And talk through it, Saoirse, if you like.
Yeah, so well, I could just read it out. So the adult that was in one of the adults in the group said that I should probably say that Polska Harp is the name that they came up for the group. And that was the kids mainly that came up with it, because they said the emblem of Ireland was, I thought it was very insightful for a child, but they said the emblem of Ireland was the harp. And they're half Irish, half Polish. So they have kind of their own emblem, which is like a Polish harp. So that's the name they picked for the group. And the parents kind of said, well, if the kids want to call it that, we'll call it that. And they had some fun in the first meeting, kind of coming up with a, what would you call it, a logo as well for the group, which they wanted put on the WhatsApp group chat that we have for the PPI group, which was, again, nice. And a nice kind of learning opportunity for me in terms of kind of cultural appropriateness and working within that sort of a community. So
that's really interesting. And I think fair play to you, Saoirse. I love that bit there. Mummy, they actually listen. She doesn't know about Polish, but she wants to learn. I think that's a lovely reflection on the dynamic that you obviously have in the group. Okay, so maybe we move on, because I'm conscious I want to let people come in with questions. Saoirse, you mentioned that you had an interesting experience when you applied for ethics. Do you want to talk briefly about that? Stop sharing there.
Yeah. So we had kind of a little bit of a dilemma around the ethics approach, whether we actually needed it or not. And one of my supervisors said, look, just to cover all our bases, we'll apply for it anyways, in case we want to publish anything that we collected from the PPI group. So I said, okay. So I applied to the ethics in the college for the PPI component, as well as another section of the project. And we got a lot of kind of hesitancy from the ethics committee in that they didn't know what PPI was. They wanted more information on it. And then we got to the dilemma of the ethics application form itself is not consistent with PPI terminology. And so we kind of had to make it very explicitly clear in the ethics application which bit was which. And they were kind of hesitant to say that we weren't calling them participants, because they're not participants in the project, whereas the ethics committee wanted them to be participants, just so that they would fit into a box, was the best way I got from them. Once we kind of explained it out explicitly, they were happy to approve it, but I don't know if it's fully, the understanding is fully there. But again, I think it comes down to the ethics form and the application process itself. It's not really conducive to PPI work. Right.
Okay, but you got through it, and I think there is change happening in that area. Okay, I have to ask you one last question, and then I'll hand over to Ayla to take the overall questions, because this is the question everybody will want to know. Did you have a budget for your PPI, or how are you managing that aspect?
So we don't have any budget for it. I did make it aware, I did make the individuals in the PPI group aware at the beginning that they weren't going to be necessarily paid for it, but that they would get a token of kind of their time.
Acknowledgement, right.
And so it'll be in the form of kind of a one for all voucher around Christmas time. And I'm just kind of figuring out at the minute with my supervisors around what that actually will look like. Will it come from my research budget itself, or kind of from my own pocket, if that makes sense?
Okay. I think that's where a number of PhD students find themselves. Okay, yes. Thank you so much, Saoirse. I know people found it interesting. Ayla, do you want to take the questions there?
Thanks, Eden.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Saoirse. That was super. It's really interesting to hear about your work. Really, really interesting. We have our first question. Just if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and you can jump in and ask a question that way, or you can throw your question into the chat, either, whichever you're more comfortable with. So our first question is coming from the chat here, and it's from Paula. She says, I'm really interested in the parent-child dynamic in the PPI panels. I missed out on this, but were the parents part of the PPI panels as well as with the children, or were they separate panels? Yeah.
It's one combined panel, Paula. But having said that, there's different tasks within the panel that what the kids would do, but the adults would do. So sometimes the meeting will be with both groups together. And then other meetings will be with one group or the other group. So, for example, when we were going through the adult invitation sheets or the parent invitation sheets for the data, we just had the parents for that meeting. And then with the children's one, we just had the children at that meeting. And then some of them, the first few meetings, we had them together. And we did then a joint meeting with the parents and the kids together after each of them had individually done the invitation group. So it kind of evolves as the project goes on, and we kind of decide that together. It's not me saying, well, we're just going to have the adults now at this meeting. We kind of decide it as a group.
Really interesting. I have a question for you. It's around the ethical considerations. I suppose, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but what are the ethical considerations when you're working with children on your as your PPI in your PPI panel? I suppose, are there resources, are there guidelines, were there any resources that were helping you along that journey that you used? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, no, specific kind of PPI guidelines, I would say no. But I think what really stood to me in incorporating, say, the children and the parents into the one group is the clinical background that I have. And the guidelines of working with kids was kind of taken from that in terms of Garda vetting and safeguarding issues that we, having the door open if you're working with kids, and having another adult there with the children, and, not being alone with one child. So when we had the groups with the kids, they weren't very long groups. They were very short because attention span. And the parents were in a room adjacent to the room that we were in, but not involved in the meeting, if that kind of makes sense. But in terms of awareness of PPI guidelines around working with children, I'm not necessarily aware of any specific ones, but that's kind of where I took my lead from, is the clinical kind of side of things, if that answers the question.
Thank you for sharing. And I see Adela's just popped in. There's an event as part of the festival looking at the ethics and working with children in a PPI approach. There's a question here, Helen has her hand raised. If you want to pop in there, Helen, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a lovely rounded discussion of your journey. You've very eloquently put about the difficulties of starting the journey. Have you had any thoughts about how you're going to finish the journey, or what next after your research with the panel? Because I suppose that's the sort of, once you start something, they sometimes want to keep going, or are interested, have evolved into an interest in research and being involved in this way. And I'm just sort of wondering if you have any thoughts or reflections of the impact, you know, that you've had on them and maybe they have had on you as well.
Yeah, that has come up in discussions with my supervisors, and the individuals that are in the PPI group are kind of work in play schools and work in education themselves. And I would love, my kind of ultimate goal, I don't know now if this is kind of postdoc research area, but I would love to write a paper together with them about their experiences, because I think this project is slightly unique in that we do have a PPI group with parents and with children, but it's also bilingual. So their first language is not my first language. And I would love, ideally, I don't know how open the journals will be to this, but have the abstract published in Polish and in English. Just, you know, I think if you're doing something like that and you're working with the community and you want to make it usable for them, that's probably, you know, a nice way to continue the research, but also to kind of, I won't say end the research, but I would say kind of bring it to a natural conclusion.
Yeah, no, I know it's sort of very much, you always think about your researching, and from the academic viewpoint, we think of our research publications, but there's so much learning and richness from the experiences that, and demonstrating today just by talking about how you went about it, we all learn from that. So it's great, and it needs to be published out there as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
There's just one more hand here raised. I'm just wondering, do we have time for the question, Edel? And
yeah, one last question from Tracy.
Yeah, Tracy, jump in there.
Hi, how are you? My name is Tracy O'Neill. I'm a PhD student in Trinity College, and thank you, Saoirse, for a fantastic presentation. So I'm also looking to incorporate PPI in my project with children and parents also. So I find this really, really interesting. Can I just double check, when you looked for ethics, did you have to get ethics purely because you probably want to evaluate the PPI involvement and maybe publish afterwards, or ethics isn't necessarily something that we have to get? Is that correct? Am I right in saying that?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
that's
okay.
exactly. It's not necessary, but we were coming from a standpoint of, just in case we did get any that we did want to publish, we wanted to cover ourselves with ethics. Yeah.
With ethics after. So in fact, your PPI panel become your participants afterwards because you might want to evaluate it.
Yeah.
Again. Okay, that's good. Excellent. Listen, thanks so much. Really
Thank
good.
you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question and your engagement, and thank you, Saoirse, for that fabulous discussion.